Hi, good morning, Caroline. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thanks, Madeline.
Hi. Should we just give it another minute, or is everybody on?
I see there are still some people joining, but perhaps you just want to take care of the admin and then we can kick off.
Okay, fine. Will do. All right. So good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the SAMED SALDA Regulatory Forum for November. I just wanted to point out that we are recording this meeting. It's so that we have a record of what was said, and by participating, you consent to that recording. So please be aware of that. And then also we have to always remind one another of the requirements of competition law and any potential conflicts of interest, because we are a group of companies in the same industry as competitors. So this meeting is held with no intent to collude or engage in any matter that might contravene competition law. Conflicts of interest must be declared, and if required, members recuse themselves either before or during the meeting as and when those conflicts become apparent. So that's really the standard wording that we need to say at the beginning of our regulatory forum. I thank you all for joining us this morning. We've got some great speakers lined up. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Madeline Pierce, chairperson of the SAMED Regulatory Committee. I'm a member of the SAMED board as well. Before we get going, I just wanted everybody to understand that we need, because this is just an ordinary Teams meeting, you need to keep your mic on mute unless you want to talk. And also, it's best to have your camera off because of bandwidth constraints and also distraction from the presentations. If you want to ask a question, please put your question in the chat, and we will try to manage and facilitate questions during the course of the talks. All right, so for this morning's program, is there an agenda, Caroline, or is it not on a slide?
It's not on the slide, Madeline.
Not on a slide. All right, so we have two speakers this morning. The one is Jeremy Wallace and the CSIR team. They are going to talk to us about regulatory support services and programs at the CSIR. Are they in fact on the call?
I did
Yes.
see Jeremy.
Hi, Madeline. Jeremy's here, Kahesh and Tiani. All three of us are here.
Oh, awesome. So we've got Jeremy, Kahesh, and Tiani. This trio works at the CSIR. So what I wanted to just give you some background to is that this all came from our SAMED conference last week. I don't know if any of you on the call were participants in that conference, but Dr. Michelle Mulder overviewed the MED-DIC program. Okay, one of the support initiatives was this CSIR's regulatory support services and programs. And this was obviously of interest to us as the medical device industry, because we know that many smaller companies don't have dedicated resources for regulatory affairs. And in fact, many of them get their regulatory information from forums such as these that we run by SAMED. In fact, this is one of the reasons why the regulatory committee has so many members and has so many meetings, is to keep the industry informed, especially those who maybe don't have the depth of staff to be able to be on top of everything at all times. So we knew you wanted to know more, and we want to know what this program includes, who can access it, and how they can access it. Additionally, we want to know how we could further support this initiative and its objectives. So we have Jeremy, Kahesh, and Tiani. They work at the CSIR. Jeremy's role, I'm told, is to manage the CSIR's industrial sensors impact area, which is a team of 25 engineers involved in the development of novel sensor products. And that team contracts with companies to develop specialized solutions to industry problems. And the team has experience in product development across a range of technology and market areas. They also have experience of medical device development. And this has led them to recently being appointed by the SAMRC and the TIA to support the Medical Device and Diagnostic Innovation Cluster Program, which is a government initiative to encourage local medical device innovation. So Jeremy's joined today by Dr. Kahesh Dunes, who is the technical head of their medical device development activities, and Tiani Matibula, their quality manager. And welcome to you all, and we look forward to your presentation. Over to you, Jeremy.
Okay, Madeline, good morning. Yes, and everyone, hello. Thank you very much for the introduction and also for the invitation to join you today. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, so the three of us on the call, you've just introduced us. I'm managing a group. Kahesh is within that group managing he's the technical lead on medical device work that we do, and Tiani's the quality manager. So hopefully between the three of us, I'm going to present some slides for you to introduce you to this medic program, and then maybe between the three of us, we can kind of answer some of your questions and explore ways that we can collaborate. So I'm just going to share screen quickly, and I won't necessarily see your hands. I don't know how this is going to work, but feel free to shout out if you have questions as we go. Okay, so yeah, so I see you were looking at the name there, the MEDDIC. So it's just called the MEDIC program, Medical Devices and Diagnostics Innovation Cluster Program, which is a part of a government program around different innovation clusters. So there are innovation clusters, for instance, in aerospace, where you try and get companies all in the aerospace sector to work together in one way or another. And you look at what they collectively need in terms of support services and so on. But there's now one started up, I think it was formally launched in March, end of March this year, if I'm right, which is the Medical Device Diagnostic Innovation Cluster program, and that was launched, as I said, the end of March. And so it's really just getting off the ground in this first year. And there's a couple of programs they've started, one of which is the support that we give. Okay, so between us, I think we should be able to answer your questions on it. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to briefly mention to you a couple of slides what actually is the MEDIC program. I'll just give you some content on that. The CSIR, the Council for Scientific Industrial Research, where we're working on, to give you a little bit of an overview. Different people have different amounts of information they know about us. So I'll just give you a little bit of an overview. We're a national government body. We'll then look at the team that we have that is supporting the MEDIC program. You know, how did we end up playing this role? I'll give you some examples of the work we've done, so you can see the kind of track record we've got that kind of led us to be in this space. We'll then look at the role that we specifically play on the MEDIC program. I've got a couple of slides on that, and then the idea was to have a bit of a discussion, particularly around how SAMED or SAMED members can support the MEDIC program, how we can work collaboratively together. Okay, so firstly, what is the MEDIC program? So there is a website, MEDIC, MRC has actually put it together as a subdomain here, medic.samrc.ac.za, which is the current placeholder, if you like, for a formal MEDIC website, which I assume will go up at some point. This Medical Device Diagnostic Innovation Cluster MEDIC program is a national initiative aiming at using all the skills, expertise and infrastructure in the company to try and get local medical device innovation going. So it's funded out of the bank account of the Technology Innovation Agency. I don't know how many people are familiar with TIA. If you're doing any sort of product development, TIA is always interested. They have a medical area, as a sub-program, if you like, and every now and again they do fund medical device development. So if there's some innovation happening in your company, you're looking for funds, TIA is the place to contact, and we can help link you up if necessary with them. They were created by the government department. It used to be Science and Technology, and within the last year they've changed to Science and Innovation. So DSI is the government department that owns the overall initiative, and it's implemented by TIA. It's one of their programs. They need somebody to obviously operationally carry out a program like MEDIC, and so what they do is they subcontract another government agency, which is the Medical Research Council, and under their Global Health Innovation Accelerator program, which is a MRC Path initiative. So within that innovation accelerator, they're hosting the MEDIC support program that we're participating in. So it's got a number of government agencies, and you know, the reason we're involved as well is that we're a government organization, so we're not a private company with our own interests and private shareholders and so on. So, you know, we are more independent, or yeah, so that's how that works. There's three core focus areas that will form the basis of the programs that MEDIC is driving. So these are really how it was being developed and designed on day one, and what TIA and the MRC are doing at the moment is looking into each of these core objectives and deciding on ways forward. You know, what would be some of the initiatives to launch under each of these areas. So there's an integrated and cohesive ecosystem, localization, rapid product development, and then human capital development. Our role is dominantly around here, but as you'll notice, regulatory kind of goes through everything. It's difficult to separate it out from any part of the medical device innovation chain. So we are largely in this one here. We've got a product development background ourselves, and the companies that we're assisting are actually doing product development in the medical device space. Okay, our role is to, if you like, triage, to use a medical term, to triage for these companies as they come in, understand exactly what space they're in, what they're trying to develop, how they're going about it, and what their needs are. And then, if we have the answers ourselves from our own experience, then we'll obviously provide the answers. And if it's something outside of our experience, or if they need more detail and specialized knowledge that we don't have, we refer them on to consultants and organizations and universities as appropriate. So as I said, we're kind of, you can think of us as kind of a triaging role, mostly under this core objective 2, localization and rapid product development. So that's the overall MEDIC program. The CSIR, just to give you some idea of who we are, you'll see us playing in a number of different spaces, from research and development right through to small-scale manufacture and piloting technologies. So if you take the National System of Innovation and you just think of the innovation chain as being from fundamental, almost blue sky research, which the universities typically are very, very good at, training human capital in that and doing publications in that area. And it goes through more applied research into technology development, product development, and then eventually technology transfer, implementation, manufacturing, logistics, etc. on the other side. So obviously industry and a lot of your members will be operating on this side, selling directly into the market. You may or may not be doing your in-house innovation, maybe just importing and packaging product, but you may be doing some sort of innovation yourselves. And what you find is that there's a bit of a gap in the middle, innovation chasm, they refer to it, and you see this in all countries around the world, where research and development starting on the one side doesn't necessarily end up on the other. The CSR was deliberately positioned in this area in the middle to aim at applied research and technology development, and to do it in partnership with the universities and with organizations, whether private or public. And so we're playing in this space in the middle here. And at some point, if we've done the pilot manufacture and got something working, we'll do a technology transfer to an organization who will then pick it up and commercialize it. You typically don't find us selling commercially the products. Okay, so that's where we're positioned in the National System of Innovation. If you really want to get technical, you can go to the Government Act. There is a Scientific Research Council Act that gets updated every now and again. But what it says is the CSR is aiming at doing multidisciplinary research and technological innovation to foster in the national interest and in fields which, in our opinion, should receive preference. So we do get an option to say, look, we'd like to work in biotech, we'd like to work in energy, security, whatever it might be. So we have some say over the areas that we work in. We then conduct industrial scientific development work. We can do it on our own, or we can do it in partnership. But the overall aim is we should be contributing to the improvement of the quality of life of the people of our republic. Okay, so that's the overall mandate of the CSIR, and each subgroup within the CSIR aims to achieve this from a different angle. Whether ours is the engineering product development kind of world, the medical device space, and we can contribute to this in that way. Okay. Some numbers, these are a couple of years old, but you'll see we're an organization turned over 2.5 billion 2 years ago. We've got a staff base of about just over 2,500, of whom 1,850 were in the science, engineering, technology base. And you can see some of our demographic information, which is very good. And you'll see that about 1,000 of those 1,850 are postgraduates, PhDs and master's qualifications. So that's kind of the profile of the organization. And the outputs we produce will be things like, journal publications, conference papers, there will be patents, technology demonstrators, and then there will be products and technologies and services that we actually license out into the market. Okay. We operate for offices all around the country, but the majority of people, and 3 of us, are based actually here in Victoria. Within the CSIR, we've got a structure which is, it's the new structure put in place 1.5 years ago, a divisional structure. And what we've done is we've put together researchers who work in areas with a common kind of market focus. So our first division has got agriculture, food, chemicals, and health. altogether. The second division looks at mining, manufacturing, defense and security, and our group happens to be part of the manufacturing group. And then we have a third division, which is smart logistics, smart places, and next generation enterprises, institutions. And so this gives a little bit of commonality amongst the different research communities. As I said, this is where the 1850 people will be living, but there's overlaps all the way through. So we for instance have some technologies which we've used for many years in defense, which we've applied into healthcare. Okay, so we will have conversations with people on this side and vice versa, and we help people on this side with some of their product development and regulatory work and so on. Okay, so within this there's a substructure of groups. This is about 250 people in manufacturing. We're about a tenth of that, 25 people, and we are the industrial sensors impact area. Okay, that's the name we have, so we're here. Okay, so that's the team we are. To give you an idea, I won't give you death by PowerPoint, but the easiest way I find to explain to people is show some pictures of the kind of things that we do. We have worked very strongly in the fields of ultrasonics and electro-optics over the years, and we have worked with private and public sector entities to produce systems in solutions to their particular problems. We've partnered in the safety and security domain for many years on the sonar side, if you're familiar with underwater technologies for sound navigation and ranging, that's sonar. And literally these surface vessels and submarine vessels our Navy uses devices that we've either developed or manufactured, and we do very small scale manufacturing for them, but virtually all the sonars they sail with are actually made by us at the CSIR. So it's a good example of where we do early stage research and development. We publish in papers, in journals and conferences, but at the same time, we're able to take it all the way through to a final usable product for our Navy. And so that range of skills we've applied to other areas as well. So able to work right across the innovation chain. We've done electro-optical work where we've developed camera systems for power line inspection, and these are now taking over half the world market, manufactured in Pretoria and exported. We've worked in areas like this, which is guided wave ultrasound, so again using the ultrasound technology for a different application for detecting brakes and heavy freight lines. But if you can just think of the product development work that goes into this, and all the quality management system stuff that goes behind it eventually, that you can come out with a manufacturable product that can be transferred to a company to manufacture. This is a world first system. It's on 1,000 kilometers in this country. It's being tested in overseas at the moment. And then finally, we applied some of these technologies many years ago into the primary healthcare region, looking at point of care diagnostics. And so we've developed a system some of you will have come across called the UmbiFlow system, which technically was developed a number of years ago, but we ended up in quite a long clinical trial phase looking for the impact that this system was actually genuinely making. And so we got involved in product development in the healthcare space. We then needed to put in place our own QMS. So we've got a 13485 9001 joint QMS system. We've been certified for the last probably 9 years now in this area. And, you know, this range of skills allows us to do product development for companies of a range of, you know, different market sectors, energy, transport, defense and health. But it also means that we've got familiarity with the regulatory side of things, and that's kind of how we ended up in this space. And so, you know, there are these kind of systems which, as I said, are manufactured. The top one is exported, the bottom two are being tech transferred in the next 3 months. You know, these systems I've mentioned, the sonar side, and then, you know, the medical side, the UmbiFlow system, which eventually showed itself able to reduce stillbirth rates by 50% in a clinic. Good example of innovation where you set out to prove a point of saving the healthcare sector costs, and it turns out the healthcare sector wasn't particularly interested in saving costs. But we noticed, by the way, that it dropped the stillbirth rate by 50%, meaning we can really reach our sustainable development goals as a country, which we previously were in no way going to be able to meet those in the next 20 years. But a system like UmbiFlow, locally developed, will now be locally manufactured. We're just commercialized it and signed a license with a local medical device manufacturer. And that information will go public at some time in the near future. But, you know, it's an example where it's been funded internationally. So Grand Challenges Canada is winding up some work with us at the moment. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has played a role. The World Health Organization has funded international studies, and Unitaid has also been in touch with us over it. And so, you know, just an example of the medical device system, but that has put us in the space that we're in of doing product development, doing medical devices. And then if you link that up with the medic program, the role we were requested to play that role for medic. Okay, so the way we operate under the medic program is we see it as being technical, and regulatory support to new entrants. So we have new entrants. Sometimes they're funded already by TIA, that's part of their medical device programs. Other times the MRC has forwarded it. We've just had an open call that finished at the end of September, and we've recently been through a steering committee meeting, and about a dozen or maybe 10 or 12 of those companies and new startups, entrepreneurs, have been admitted in for technical and regulatory support. So this is managed by a steering committee between ourselves, TIA, and MRC. Internally, our operations, the three of us on the call today are the OpCo for this program, and then Kahesh on the call is, as I said, he's managing the overall initiative. So if you email the medic at CSIR address, I'll show you at the end, Kahesh will pick up on your email and we can get connection going. The kind of support that companies are asking, it differs hugely. Any of you that have been in the consulting space, I know Andre would have been, obviously he'll be familiar with these kind of questions coming his way. So questions around regulatory side of things, product development, as well as the device manufacturing and distribution side of things. So there's 8 bullets here which describe how we operate and the kind of things we give people support on. In none of these cases are we saying we're the world's experts on it or even the country experts on it. It just so happens that we happen to have a handle on all of these at the same time. And so it allows us to kind of triage, support where we can, and refer where we don't have all the answers. And the overall idea is to unblock the pathway forward for a company. And as you'll be aware, it's quite a complex space, the regulatory space, and it tends to be that people ignore it until the point they've got something ready to test. And that's usually a little bit too late. You should have been doing your 13485 aspects much earlier. So we have questions coming to us around product development. How do you do it within the context of the ISO standard for medical devices? You know, the device classification questions, standards identification. In doing this, we've also linked up with some of the regulatory consultants in the country, and we've linked up with the SABS to make sure that people get all their questions answered. When you're developing a medical device, you want to end up with it in a format that can be manufactured, because you obviously need to get your technical file together. And so one of the things that we've done over the years is configuration management, which results in a manufacturing data pack that goes out with all the information required for this device to be developed and tested. We help in locating service providers. You know, we'll have people approaching us with a polymer material they're using for something, but they need the properties and how do they get this tested, and we'll find them a service provider who can actually do those tests for them and link them up. We've also linked up with CEDA on this, and where companies require product testing, CEDA has a grant. I think it goes to about 60,000 Rand per opportunity. So we now have regular meetings with CEDA, and we introduce these companies to CEDA to get that kind of support. There's lots of questions, as you can imagine, around the quality management systems themselves. And so what we do is we just open up the file system. We talk people through how we've implemented a quality management system to 13485. And so they get a feel for what it actually means to have one. Sometimes just actually showing them one and talking them through it. And we can also show them the documents we've prepared for our medical device work to show them what this might look like. For them. Okay, so there's a lot of questions around there. If, for instance, they then need to develop their own medical device, QMS, you know, that's not something that we would do with them. We would refer them to the likes of Andre and other regulatory consultants in the country, who then take over what they do well, which would be to help them develop that QMS and get their product through the market. There's obviously questions around the SAPRA process that we answer, and we've got a link into SAPRA, a key person there, a contact point that assists with quick answers to questions. And whether it's their process or whether it's helping them, just guiding them on what a master file, the technical file actually is all about. The documents are on SAPRA's website, as we know. But, you know, quite often people just want you to talk them through those documents so that you can actually, they get an understanding of what goes into each section. And, you know, invariably nobody's asking you to do this for them. They want to do it themselves, but they just somebody to give them a leg up and into the door so they can get working on it. And then finally, medical device testing aspects, whether it's a lab facility or clinical trial testing, you know, either we refer them on to somebody or we'll help them find a group that can run the clinical testing, because typically they don't have the resources or the personnel to drive their own clinical testing or understand what they need to achieve from those clinical tests. So that's the range of questions that come in and how we provide support. And then internally, we have ourselves a flow chart, if you like, on how this happens. So a new entrant would arrive with us. Typically, they don't want to tell us all their secrets, so we sign an NDA, non-disclosure agreement with them. We usually get them to fill in a basic questionnaire up front just to understand what it is that they're actually doing, and then we filter based on that. In some cases, they're in the wrong place, so we can refer them. Nobody gets turned away, obviously. We'll help them in some way and refer them on to whoever can help them. But if they look like a good match, we go through our steering committee, and if they get admitted, we ask them to sign an acceptance of terms sheet of how we provide the support. We then get into some more detailed engagements with them, have online meetings these days, obviously, understand the product, understand the questions, what is the support that they need, and it can fit into the 3 areas that I just mentioned with you. And then, you know, they go away and they come back. And so there's kind of ongoing support depending on what they need. And finally, they should be out of this program and through into the market. And so that's how we operate. And as I said, recently we've closed off an open call, but it doesn't mean that we won't take on new entrepreneurs or SMEs or even larger companies in the future. It just depends, limited to some extent by the funding that is available at this point in time. And that funding might increase so we can help hopefully more companies as time goes by. Right, and then yeah, just to wind up, I threw down, just to get the conversation going, how could SAMED support the MEDIC program? And just, there's like 4 or 5 ideas that kind of came to mind initially. You know, you obviously already do your own product testing, whether it's in-house or outsourced. And you know, if you're prepared to share some of that information, if you do tests for other companies, maybe share that with us as well, so that we will, you know, keep a database of these kind of things. A lot of these companies, you know, they won't have a QMS on day one, and there's no way they're going to start manufacturing. So assuming they need the 13485, they'll be looking for a manufacturer who can pick up some of the early stage manufacturing work for them, and that might develop into a longer term relationship. I don't know, you know, it just depends on the case. So we've already got companies who are being referred through to manufacturers. And in one case, we've already got somebody who's taking on a distributor role with one of these. So there are opportunities, I think, for companies in SAMED. And, you know, depending on your social conscience and social programs, in some cases, people may be prepared to do some mentoring of some of these entrepreneurs and SMEs, and if that might interest you. And I'm sure there's other ideas too. So that's the story around the MEDIC program and the support that we give. So yeah, we're open to questions, Madeleine.
Thanks, Jeremy. Do we have any questions from the group? So while you're thinking about your questions, I'm glad you answered the question, how can SAMED support the MEDIC program? Because I just wanted to let you know that in our trade association, we have, you know, upwards of, it's almost 200 companies if you had to count everybody and associate members. We have a number of companies that would be maybe deemed startup or new entrants. We would also have some local manufacturers who may be trying to develop products. And so we have the whole gamut of kinds of companies that fall into the medical device sector. So from large multinationals right through to people who are just bringing in a few products or trying to manufacture a new product that they've designed. So, you know, we try to support our members by running a regulatory committee, as I mentioned, and I think we've got about 38 members who are part of our committee. And part of that support is trying to answer members' queries, similar to what you were laying out that the CSIR MEDIC group does. And, you know, we also try to advise people when they're not getting responses from SAPRA. What I would be very interested to understand from you guys is, you know, you're seeing an evolving regulatory framework coming out of SAPRA. Not all of that is really aligned to how medical devices are regulated worldwide. And, you know, we as an industry are taking a very firm stance on not allowing South Africa to end up with very onerous and non-harmonized regulation. I just wonder if you've had any opportunities to maybe advise or talk to SAPRA about the regulations and guidelines that are coming out of that office?
At this point, Madeleine, we haven't. I suppose as a government body, you know, we either don't want to step on the toes, but at the same time, we're in a position to give an independent view. We haven't engaged at this point, and I would imagine at some point, you know, that is a conversation that will happen. I am aware of some of the conversations that have been held with SAMED, with SAPRA, from the regulatory consultants' perspective, who have been asking such questions. But it is a debate that we're not in with them at the moment, but it's a good suggestion to maybe pick up with them at the moment, how they view it, and just, yeah, that's something we can certainly look into.
I'm just wondering if, Jeremy, if maybe you can't play the role as one of the key stakeholders when we do these workshops. We in fact had a 3-hour workshop with SAPRA yesterday, and for those of you who were part of that, it was a difficult but very constructive conversation. You know, we managed to get through some very thorny and kind of tricky areas. And there's one area that is a massive issue for the industry, and that is the certification of companies to ISO 13485, because the reality is the kind of companies that are in the sector are probably quite a few months, if not years, away from getting certification, and certainly can't afford it. So we're looking for solutions, and we've actually got a special working group that's going to do a smaller meeting with SAPRA in the next couple of days, just to try to understand the way forward, the roadmap, and help everybody get on the right path. So I see a question from Caroline. She says, can we have a contact for those who want to get in touch? Ah, there we go. Awesome. Thank you.
So, yeah, sort of click through to that last one. So, yeah, just medic at CSIR, and say Kesh will, he monitors that inbox for us.
So would you be open to an invitation by industry to have us, to join us with discussions with SAPRA, or do you think that that is beyond your remit?
No, I think we'd be very interested to participate in those discussions. So I think invite us in. Yeah.
All right, so I will make sure that if there are going to be opportunities to discuss, particularly when it comes to the sort of innovation, startup, manufacturing, and technology transfer areas of regulation, then I think that you would be a key voice, or you and your team, certainly.
Yeah, and I think the MRC as well. You know, I mean, Michelle Mulder and team, they're also worthy participants in this kind of conversation. I mean, one of the things I showed you, I think it was early on in the slides, if we just go back up, was, you know, the one over here on human capital development. You know, like SABS not really having skills anymore to do kind of audits and things in the medical devices area. So one of the programs that will likely come out under here that Michelle, I know, is looking at, and we've taken the links we've got into SABS and passed them on to her, is, you know, how do we run some program to help train up some of these auditors, and how can industry be a part of getting that competence into SABS? You know, because it's you need it. I mean, we can't really, as you say, you can't roll out a framework in the country and tell everybody to get this QMS standard done, and then you don't really have the resources up and down the ecosystem, and so that's part of, you know, I think this over here, strengthening the ecosystem. So I think the MRC might be a useful to get somebody from that group to participate as well, because as I said, they are looking at that type of support and how they can improve the ecosystem.
Okay, so obviously, you know, anything that builds the capacity and also brings new entrants, like maybe young graduates, into the program. I'm thinking the audit aspect, there's probably plenty of opportunity. There are many companies that probably would be open to having a trainee auditor come and try and do an audit to help them improve, you know.
Indeed, yeah. And in fact, one of the things we're doing, initiatives, is I think it's about 2 weeks from now, we're making a presentation to I think it's open to anybody at UCT. We've linked up with the medical devices development group down there, and we're doing a presentation around the regulatory space, just generally, not just medical devices, but regulatory space generally, and then focusing a little bit in on medical and showing an example of how it might actually take place. So and I think most of these universities are involved in some sort of medical device work, but they really don't know about 13485. And so just trying to sensitize them to that. But certainly if there could be a way of linking up some of those people doing medical device work, they could get experience at a company, shadowing somebody who's already in a quality management role, authorized rep role, that would be fantastic.
Right. Well, I definitely think that we must, have further discussions about that, because we also have an imperative at SAMED to transform the industry, to bring, skills and to build capacity. Yeah. So, I think we're in sync on that one. I see a question from Sarah Cohen, who's from this Laboratory Diagnostics Association. Sarah, I don't know if you want to open your mic and just address your question.
Thank you so much, Madeleine, and thanks for the great presentation. I think some of our members, particularly because they focus on the diagnostics, would perhaps want to know who to contact to have further discussions with you at the CSIR and maybe look at collaboration. So that's the question that I posed, just a contact name, and then look at
I think if anybody's got any questions, just pop us an email there.
Thanks.
And just get the conversation going, a quick couple of lines to introduce yourself, and then we can have a Teams call.
Great. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
All right. Well, look, I think this has been a bit of a discovery. We've realized that there are, obviously, there's hubs of scientific innovation, and there are people working on medical devices in many sectors in the country. But I think to have people who are aligned with us in terms of our fight to get the regulations right, I just want everybody to understand SAMED as an industry understands the need for regulation. You have to have regulation of products that are being used that could potentially hurt people. All right. But at the same time, what you don't want is regulation that is so onerous that it ends up stultifying the industry, and also what you find is that products just don't find their way to South Africa, and that is a dampening effect on healthcare. So I see we've got Michelle also making a comment here. We will ensure that we include all relevant contact details for the support on Medic website in the next day or so. Oh, great. Glad to have you on the call, Michelle, and thank you very much for letting us know about the website. Great. Okay, so what we're saying is that we want to get the right regulations. So the level of oversight should be, at the right place, but it should also not be so onerous that people just walk away from it. And we're also starting to notice that in the region, in the SADC region, many of you will be aware that there are other countries that are starting to regulate. And what we are worried about is that some of these regulations might be quite detailed and onerous and not harmonized, and the market just isn't big enough to support that sort of thing. So what happens is people say, we won't be selling in that country. So that's the last thing we want. We want people to have good access to healthcare with proper regulation. So that's really, where our point of departure is. And Jeremy and Kahesh and Tiani and Michelle, thank you very much for joining our forum this morning. I don't know if there are any more questions. This is your opportunity to maybe just quickly ask something that you were wondering about. If not, I just want to say thank you very much for taking the time. I'm very glad we made the linkage, and we'll be no doubt in contact in the weeks to come, and maybe we can put together some sort of collaborative projects and see if we can support one another on what we're trying to do.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. Thanks everyone for the opportunity again. I think it would be quite useful for Tiani from our side as our quality manager to maybe attend these meetings on a more regular basis. I think that would be quite useful.
Well, I think that there is definitely scope for collaboration and invitations to join the forums. If you want to hear more, just contact the SAMED office and we can set that up for you.
Excellent. All right? Okay, great stuff. Thank you very much, everyone.
All right, thanks everybody, and thanks for your questions, the folks who put something forward. All right, so now we move on. We have two more speakers to this morning. We have an overview of the European MDR and IVDR from Andre ten Napel, who's a regulatory consultant with TNMC Medical Devices. And we also have Lizelle, who's going to talk about African medical device regulations. Who would like to go first? Is Lizelle still not on the call? Caroline?
I don't see her. She did say she'd join at 9:40. It's just gone 9:40. So she might just
All
be
right.
one
Well,
minute late.
so why don't we just go ahead with Andre? If Andre, are you prepared to go first?
100%. Thank you very much.
All right. Let me introduce you quickly. This is a very hot topic for us: European medical device regulation and IVD regulation. Then, we're looking at Europe because obviously there's a lot of synergies between regulatory requirements in Africa and South Africa and Europe, and it has a regulatory effect on how things get regulated all over the world. Then the MDR, medical device regulation, and the IVDR are new regulatory frameworks coming into effect, and anyone trading with this region will need to understand what the implications are for industry. So I'm very happy to introduce Andre ten Napel, who's very well known and a respected regulatory consultant for many years. He's worked not only in South Africa, but in overseas. And for 32 years, Andre has consulted to various companies on best practice management systems and actively started consulting to medical device companies in 1993 when the medical device regulation in Europe was published. That was the old MDD. So thank you very much for being available to speak with us this morning, Andre. We really value your input, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Madeline, and thank you very much for the group. I hope I'm going to try and make it as interesting as possible, but understanding to try and get a piece of law to be interesting. It sometimes almost fall asleep when I give presentations on the MDR because it's so regulatory, it's so difficult, and the way that they put it. But what I've done, I've tried to make it as easy as possible to actually just highlight what are the major changes and what are the effect in terms of companies and what do we need to do. So that's what I'm way that I'm going to try and make it interesting for you. Just before I start, Jeremy, thank you very much for a good presentation. And I think sometimes we actually lose focus in terms of how much effort in terms of medical devices being put into this country. We've recently, through the lockdown period, we started with a project with Mercita. We had 150 students on call, and we actually developed a medical device through this whole Mercita project with UJ, CUT, VUT, and TUT, where this software was developed, the product was developed through this whole value chain. And today there's a lot of people who's actually gained access to not only product development in the medical device space, but obviously also how to actually get these products to market, what are the regulatory requirements. So a lot of things happening sometimes behind the scenes, but I think it's wonderful to actually see what's going on. So I'm going to share my screen then, and just want to get it share there, and then we just want to see, can you see my screen? My screen up on it, Thomas. Everyone can see the screen?
Yes, you can. Thank you.
100%. Thank you very much. So we're going to talk today about the medical device regulation of Europe, MDR 2017-745. Now, this regulation, it came up in 2017, as the number indicates, and it actually amend some of the directives and regulations. But most important of this is that it actually repeals the Council directives for active medical devices, 9385, as well as the 9342 EEC, specific directives on active devices, as well as general medical devices. So yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. We hope that we'll try and make it as interesting as possible. That's just the front page of our regulation. It's a huge document, 300 odd pages with a small little 10-point font. and that's a regulation which we had to work through.
Andre, if I can interrupt.
Certainly.
Madeline, we've got a duplicate screen. Is that what everybody's seeing, or is it just me?
It is a duplicate screen. Andre, if you go to the top where it says display settings,
Display settings, sorry.
and then you can just say swap view. Yeah.
Thank you, sorry, thank you. Is it right now?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So that's the front page of that regulation then. So the next, which I would like to share with you, is that the European regulation seeks market access to the European Union. You face major changes in terms of the old 1993 regulatory standard, or regulatory framework which we had, and it needed to be actually overhauled and to bring it in line with today's technology, in line with today's type of product in terms of regulatory. So the European Medical Device Regulation was officially published on the 5th of May and came into force on the 25th of May 2017. However, it was postponed until 24 May 2021 due to COVID. So the MDR replaces the current Medical Device Directive 9342 EC, published in 1993, which had 5 amendments until the year 2016, and the European Directive on Implantable Medical Devices. So the overview of the changes, so if we just look at those two regulations then, been incorporated into one medical device regulation, 2017-745, and then the IVD directive, which actually been replaced by 2017-746. Overview of the changes, the general features, we've moved from the 3 directives to the two regulations. Direct effect, reinforce conformity assessment, how to actually make sure that your device actually meets the essential principles of general safety requirements. Clear obligations for economic operators. So in terms of what are the responsibilities and liabilities for manufacturers, authorized representatives, and distributors. And that includes distributors worldwide. A greater emphasis on supply chain traceability. So you will be able to trace any product. Once this thing is 100% being implemented, you will be able to trace a product, any product, medical devices, from the serial number or the lot number right through until the manufacturer, etc. And enhance the market surveillance by authorities. Those are some of the general features in terms of changes. So what does the structure look like? So what we have is we have 10 chapters, just the scope and definitions, making available on the market and putting into service of devices. So what is the obligation of economic operators, processing, CE marking, free movement. Next chapter, chapter number three, identification of traceability of devices. Then chapter number 4, control of the notified bodies, as we try to refer to them in South Africa as competent assessment bodies. Then number 5, classification and conformity assessment processes. Number 6, clinical evaluation, clinical investigations. Post-market surveillance, vigilance and market surveillance. And then number 9, cooperation between the member states, medical device coordination groups, expert laboratories, expert panels, and device registers. And then final provisions. Then we have another 123 articles plus 17 annexes to this whole monster of a regulation. Why these changes? Why did Europe change this radically? We had a number of instances. For instance, we had the big hip recall, we had the breast implant scandal, and with that, we got unannounced audits embedded now in our regulations, formally in the regulations, liability insurance. So now it's unannounced audits. Anytime the auditor can be at your office the next morning unannounced, and you will be able to actually, you will have to accommodate him to actually do an audit. Liability insurance has now been addressed formally in the regulation. Clinical evidence, not only safety, is properly being defined in the regulation. Competent authority audits of notified bodies are now defined. So the competent authorities like our SAPRA, for instance, if we're looking at typically at Croatia, where we have an office, there we're working with HALMED as our competent authority. They now have the prerogative to actually go and audit the notified bodies and other economic operators as well. And they can also call up a medical device file to actually go and review that. Then product scope and expansion. So the definition of a medical device as an active implantable medical device is covered under the MDR is significantly expanded to include devices that do not have a medical intended purpose, such as colored contact lenses, which were excluded in the MDD, is now included in the MDR. And some cosmetic implant devices and certain materials are now defined within the definition of medical devices. Also, for inclusion within the scope of regulation of devices designed for the purpose of prediction of diseases and other health conditions, such as software and wearable devices, are now properly defined within the regulation. So if you've got a wearable device which actually monitors your heart rate or monitors your blood pressure, then those type of devices are now actively being regulated. The next one is the classification devices. So we've got a number of classification changes which came into effect. So reclassification of devices according to risk, contact duration, and invasiveness has been addressed. A typical example of that is we always had instrumentation, instrumentation on for implants, for instance, on knee implant, hip implant, spinal implant, etc. The instrumentation always used to be class 1, which we always wondered, how do you actually have this product being invasively used in a patient, but it's classed as class 1. Now it's properly classed. And so it's a lot of changes in terms of that. Certain implants has been moved out from class 2B to class 3. And so I think it's a very good thing, which actually in terms of patient safety, which has happened there. So the MDR requires device manufacturers to review the updated classification rules and update their technical documentation accordingly by considering the fact that class 3 and implantable devices will have higher clinical requirements. Then, it is expected that device manufacturers will also require to collect and retain post-market clinical data as part of the ongoing assessment of potential safety risks. And that's on all medical devices, from the unsterile bandage right through to a pacemaker. The post-market clinical data, the feedback of those devices is becoming very important in terms of maintaining your CE certification in the future. These changes will result in a dramatic increase in the time and resources needed by manufacturers to conduct required studies and to maintain post-market documentation. So just if I look at that ring on the bottom there, so we're looking at various phases. So to actually look at clinical data. But the most important aspect of that is that it's a proactive post-market surveillance system with a vigilance report, post-market clinical follow-up, and trend reporting, which on certain devices will have to be done on an annual basis and published. So there's more rigorous clinical evidence for class 3 and implantable medical devices. Manufacturers need to conduct clinical investigations in case they do not have sufficient clinical evidence to support their claims done on both safety and performance. So all of these devices will have to be re-looked at in terms of what clinical documentation do I have, what clinical reporting do I have on my devices, do I have to redo my clinical investigation. On class 2A and class 2B devices, manufacturers will need to prepare their clinical evaluations by considering the new wording of a regulation when an equivalence approach is followed. In other words, you can claim my device is equal to another device. And there's certain published data on that specific device. Because I'm using the same material, I've got the same intended use, I've got the same processes in place to manufacture this device, then I could make a claim that my device, I can use the data in the public domain to say that I don't have to do a clinical investigation. So all of these things need to be done, but on a proper procedurized process. So stage 1 is identification of typical pertinent data. Stage 2 is the appraisal of the data. Stage 3, analysis of the clinical data. Stage 4, clinical evaluation report, and that needs to be being done for all devices, all class 2A and 2B devices. Identification of qualified person. The device manufacturers, distributors, and authorized representatives, whether located within or outside Europe, will be required to identify at least one person within the organization who is responsible for all aspects of compliance with requirements of the MDR. The organization must document this specific qualification of its individual relative to the required tasks. Further qualification of responsible persons will be subject to review by notified bodies to ensure mandatory knowledge and skill. So what is a qualified person? What is the requirements of such a person? It's a person with a diploma, certificate, or otherwise a formal qualification awarded on completion of a university degree or a course or study recognized as equivalent by the member states. Or alternatively to that, 4 years professional experience in regulatory affairs. When they do exclude micro and small enterprises to have such a person on board, as long as they have access to such a person. So such a person must be at their disposal. So typically a regulatory consultant can be used for a micro and small enterprise rather than having sometimes full-time employed. So what is it? This all competence is based on the knowledge, the skills, and obviously the non-duty and responsibility. So that all things are validated, all documentation are validated, all qualifications are validated, all processes are validated to make sure that we actually bring safe medical devices onto the market. Then the next one is the EuroMed system, the European Database and Medical Device System. So effectively what will happen is that we will have to all register at EuroMed. We as a medical device authorized representative in Europe, we've already registered, so we have our single registration number as an economic operator, but that will have to be happen for all economic operators, being manufacturers, authorized representatives, distributors, agents, must also registered at EuroMed. So what we try to do is to actually make the traceability throughout the supply chain as easy as possible. So this will typically be the UDI identifier label, which we will see in the future. So one is machine readable and one is human readable with device identifier, the expiration date, the lot number or serial number, which will go onto the label. So that will trace that specific device back to the OEM manufacturer, will take it to the authorized representative, to the notified body, and eventually to the competent authority. So all of those things are now 100% linked in terms of traceability for the specific device and specific lot number. Now that makes it, for manufacturers, makes it very interesting. I mean, if you have to register each lot or to be manufactured at the UDI system, it's going to be a massive database worldwide. Then rigorous post-market oversight. So the MDR will grant notified bodies increased post-market surveillance authority. So they can come into the company, they can actually ask for samples. So product samples can be checked, or product testing will be looked at. Plus they can do unannounced audits. And all to do with one thing, and that's to reduce the risks for unsafe medical devices. Annual safety and performance reporting by device manufacturers will also be required in many cases. Then specifications. So at the moment, under the MDG, we have a list of standards, common harmonies and right standards, but the MDR gives the EU Commission or expert panels the authority to publish common specifications. So we might, if we look at sutures, for instance, in the FDA situation, we have a very specific guideline for sutures, and I think those type of things will now move over to Europe as well, where specific guidelines or specific specifications will be published for high-risk type of devices. So that the common specification would exist in parallel to the harmonized standards and will be seen as a state of the art and would be considered as part of the evaluation process by the notified bodies to make sure that we actually comply to those specific common specifications. The grandfather situation is now falling away. So we can't say that we've had this device, this channeling hip on the market since 1950, and we have done so many patients, and it's unfortunately not going to happen. So under the MDR, all current approved devices must be recertified in accordance with the new requirements. Manufacturers with current approved devices will have 3 years to demonstrate compliance with the MDR's new requirements. Now, this is a major challenge to notified bodies. You can imagine we've got a handful of notified bodies which has been authorized under the MDR, and within that handful, we only have a handful of auditors or technical experts to actually evaluate technical files, and I don't think we've got enough capacity to do all of these devices in 3 years, but that is a major challenge to notified bodies. So until when will your MDD certificate be valid? So at this point in time, certain medical device directives and active medical device directives will be until the date on the certificate actually lapses, and then latest on 27 May 2024, no more medical device certificates will be available. It needs to be under the MDR, so nothing under the Medical Device Directive 342 EEC. So challenge in terms of clinical, all products needs clinical evidence, even if it's already on the market for years. All medical device technical files to be updated. Question which we have, will all products pass a new challenge? So because the requirements has been so uplifted. Significant increase in clinical investigations of performance studies, which you will see in the next couple of years. And I think some of the devices will simply have to be withdrawn from the market because they won't actually fit in the new mold. So how do we ensure compliance? So what we've done is we actually map these things as we've done on the one axis. We actually put over here the company's documentation. On that axis, we've actually put the MDR requirements. So these are all the specific clauses of the MDR. And then we map on this, we actually map, so where do we actually have to change all our documentation so that it fits within the MDR requirements. So that is the articles, which we actually look at each of the articles, and then we look at the annexes, and that's just one way that we actually handled it to do that. So yeah, the challenges to the MDR, I think if this guy says to his friend, your user requirements include 400 features for this device. And he says, do you realize that no human would be able to use a product with that level of complexity? Good point. I will add ease to use to the list. What's the benefits for manufacturers? First of all, access to market in terms of manufacturers to get their products. Remember, in South Africa, we've got the 6 domains, which on class C and D, if you register with SAPRA for an establishment license at the moment, you have to provide evidence of your class C and D device that you actually has been registered either in Europe or in America in the FDA, or in Brazil or Japan or Canada, or under the TGA. So if you actually use the EC certificate, then obviously you have to make sure that that EC certificate is maintained. I think the next thing is the credibility of medical devices goes just one level up in terms of that that device has been scrutinized and the proper systems is behind that, and proper evaluation and clinical evaluation has been done on a medical device with a CE mark. And I think some of our funders today actually realize that. I think a lot of you who actually supplied into the mediclinics, etc., has now realized that we're now calling for CE certification on specifically on implants. We've actually just should only accept lately the CE mark certification. Lastly, there the increased value of a company to have ISO 13485 and an EC certificate. We estimated in our company in Belgium, when we were at the 3D printing spinal implant company in Belgium, we estimated that it's between 600 and €1 million worth of having a certificate to ISO 13485 and an EC certificate on an implant. So what should distributors and agents do? Request an action plan from your OEMs on the changeover to the MDR requirements. Start registering your company at UDAMED as an economic operator. And have a plan B, for those risk products which might lose the CE mark, have an alternative to actually supply your industry or your environment. Note, if you registered at SAPRA with an OEM CE certificate for Class C devices, it needs to be maintained. That was what I wanted to share with you today. And if there are any questions, more than willing to take that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andre. I think you managed to present it with a lot of clarity and simplicity, because it is a massive tangle. and I think everybody who talks about EU MDR, it has a certain kind of dread attached to it, because we are worried that we will end up in a situation where we have products that don't qualify or can't be moved around. So I don't know if anybody has any particular questions for Andre at this stage. I did have one while you guys are thinking. The EU MDR came from a harmonized regulation that was kind of fed into the IMDRF. So it had synergies. It wasn't the same as, but it had synergies with the likes of the FDA, the TGA, the Japanese authorities, Anvisa, the big hitters in the regulatory world. And now, obviously, because of the reasons that you put forward, that regulation has shifted and has actually upped its game. And I was wondering, what has been the response by the other regulators? And are we in a situation now where we've got divergent regulations where, maybe harmonization is further away than it used to be? I don't know if that question makes sense, but
Sure. It absolutely makes sense, and I think that's where the MDSAP, the Medical Device Single Audit Program, comes into effect. So remember that the US, with Japan, Canada, as well as Europe, are all sitting on the MDSAP environment. So in terms of regulations, there is a lot of harmonization being done. And I think we will see this type of approach, which medical device regulation has taken, very soon. We will see that with the FDA changing that way that by doing things, because they're more and more moving closer to, they're now accepting ISO 13485, where they always just had the 820. But we're actually moving the 820 with a new update, which we're working in the background closer to ISO 13485. But we're actually, the regulations is coming closer to the MDSAP type of requirement. And I think in maybe many years to come, there might be one type of regulation worldwide, which I think will be the right thing to do. But at the moment, it is a little bit difficult in different markets. If I look at Brazil again, it's just, and visa system, it just makes it a lot difficult as well. We must understand that medical device regulations is also a trade barrier. It's access to market. The Americans don't necessarily want everyone to actually sell in their country. They want to make it difficult for you.
Actually, you make a very good point. I mean, sometimes the regulation is not only to serve the patient safety and the access. So interesting point. I see a question from Shalini Naidu. Thanks, Shalini. Can you explain a little more on Article 120? And what are some of the changes we would need to implement now while we're transitioning to the medical device regulation? Andre, I don't know if you can see the question on the screen, but Shalini, do you want to maybe speak to it, or Andre, can you go ahead?
Give us a little bit more overview, Sylvie.
Hi, Andre. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good. So just a quick one. So we've been focusing a little bit on Article 120, and those are some of the transitions that I think a medical device manufacturer might miss while transitioning to the MDR. So Article 120 is talking to the things that we should have complied with by I think 26 May this year.
Yep.
Things like, your distributor agreements need to be updated to have certain clauses in it. So what are the repercussions of not complying with Article 120 now? What are some of the major things we should be focusing on?
Yeah. What we're seeing in our audits lately with even under the MDD and the review of documentation under the MDD, that the notified bodies are already pushing the manufacturers to actually start complying with the MDR, although it's not compulsory, but they are asking specific questions. So under Article 120, when they do an audit on 13485 as well as the MDD requirements, then they do look at Article 120 and the requirements of that, whether you've got your agreements in place. But it's actually always been embedded in the old MDD as well, in terms of liability, in terms of traceability, in terms of what you need to do, in terms of keeping traceability of your devices out in the market, even though the manufacturer sits overseas. So effectively, it was always there, but it's just more clearly defined today.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Andre. And then we have a question from Jeremy Wallace from the CSIR saying, thanks for the presentation. What sort of delays do you foresee on CE marks being issued these days?
Good question, Jeremy. It's at the moment we're battling within 5 years to get a quotation out of the notified bodies because they're so overworked, they just don't have capacity. So we're battling to, first of all, get quotation. Secondly, when we do get a quotation, I had a quotation 2 weeks ago for a company in Russia, which wants us to help them with a laser device to bring that onto the market. There's audit, and they were with a notified body which no longer are notified under the MDR, the MDD. So we had to change notified bodies. So the cost for an ISO 13485 audit plus one medical device file technical evaluation came to just over R1 million.
Yeah, so I think that notified bodies are in a lot of trouble because I think it's been a huge upheaval in the industry, and some of them have chosen to actually walk away and haven't gotten involved. So I think the number of notified bodies in Europe has dropped dramatically. Am I right, Andre?
Absolutely, and same with auditors, and the criteria for a medical device auditor under the MDR, they just made it so difficult for guys to actually qualify.
So I think this is going to be it'll be interesting how it plays out, because we have a transition period until I think it is May 2025. Am I right?
24.
Is it 20? I heard, yeah. I also thought it was 24, but then recently I heard 2025. I don't know if it's changed. But anyway, so that's just a short few months. It might seem far away, but it actually isn't. And then everything that is on the market will have to be compliant with MDR. So watch this space. I think as people who sell imported goods that have come out of the EU or that have got CE marked, I think we as an industry need to keep our eye on this regulation, and we need to understand our role in the supply chain and whether we need to keep records and traceability. And then also we need to understand what might not be coming down the pipeline in terms of supply, because things are getting stopped or discontinued for reasons, economic reasons, because it simply doesn't make sense to have the EU MDR compliance. So yeah, any other questions, guys, that you have? Somebody with a wealth of experience here, this is your opportunity if there's anything you want to ask. Give you a few more seconds. You can put your hands up as well and open your mic if you can't type fast. All right. Okay. So I just wanted to say thank you very much, Andre, for your input. And obviously you are such a valued voice in our discussions with SAPRA because of your background in the more stringent and more mature regulatory frameworks. You know where things are headed, you know what works and what doesn't. And I look forward to interacting with you, especially on the conformity assessment body discussion that we hopefully will be conducting in the next couple of days. So thank you so much for your time. I know you're a very busy person, and yeah, we really appreciate your participation at the regulatory forum. Okay, thank you, Andre.
Thank you very much, and if you will excuse me then, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, guys, we are now at the point where we were going to present the African Medical Device Regulations update with Lisa Dreyer-Fouchier. She's the Regulatory Affairs Manager, Africa Middle East for Abbott Molecular. But we have come across a bit of a bump in the road because Lizelle was unfortunately called away. She wasn't able to present. She has a really great set of slides, and I know many of you will be disappointed because you were hoping to get caught up on what's happening with all the changes across Africa. Now, last time when we had this particular slot, I just stepped in and presented, but I think it will be counterproductive for me to do that today because, first of all, I haven't actually had sight of Lizelle's slides, and I don't really want to do it an injustice. So what Karen and I have discussed back channeling while Andre was talking is that we're going to actually present or provide the slides to you all on the SAMED news. Is that correct, Caroline?
That is correct. If you're not on the SAMED news, just let me know and I'll send it to you directly.
All right, so at least you'll have sight of the slides, and if there's good information on that, you can at least borrow from that. But what I would like to tell you is that there is a SAMED subgroup for African regulations that's been put together. There's about 6 of us who are working on that. And what we are doing is we're going to run an African regulatory database. And it's, you know, it's going to have all the African countries on it. It will have those countries that are of most interest to us, which are obviously the bigger markets, the ones that will actually have the health systems that are sophisticated enough to buy medical devices, or the ones that are having startup or greenfield projects where they're going to be importing a lot of medical devices for the builds of hospitals and, you know, the setup of specialists or primary healthcare facilities. So we'll tier the countries into you know, priorities. We will also look at the ones that are regulated versus the ones that are unregulated. Then what we will also do is we will try to help everybody understand the actual reality on the ground as opposed to what information is in the public domain on websites and from general discussions and publications, gazettes, comments, all of that. So there are lots of aspects of regulation that we need to look at in Africa, not least how regulations are converging with other countries. So, for example, what's happening in the East Africa community, what's happening in ECOWAS, what's happening with the Saudi FDA and some of the North African countries that are starting to look in that direction, and what's happening at SADC. So, you know, I think it's very important that we don't end up with 54 states and 54 different ways to regulate medical devices. That would be really counterproductive. We're also going to be looking at what's happening with the Africa Free Trade Agreement and some of the Africa Medical Device Forum initiatives. So there's a lot going on in Africa that we really want to keep you all appraised of. So it's unfortunate that we weren't able to present today, but what I can promise is that probably once a quarter, we will update that database. And that, I think, will be immensely helpful to the membership because you will be able to see links to documents, contact numbers if needed. And then we'll also look at some of the more specialized regulations, such as what happens with spare parts, what happens with software as a medical device, what happens when you have refurbished goods, are they allowed? And also if there are any radio frequency, Bluetooth, and those kinds of regulations that need to be taken into account. So that's our ambition. For those of you who are interested and would like to join the subgroup, you know, we are open to having additional members. So please do reach out to the SAMED office and they can you know, provide your name to me, and I will try to give you a task, and we can put together the very best intelligence on African regulations going forward. So I am sorry about Lizelle not being able to present, but as I said, you will get the slides, and I will give back 45 minutes of your time this morning, which is always a win. So thank you very much for your attention, and we will meet again, no doubt, in the new year. I wish you all the very best for the week ahead and the year ahead. Thank you. Okay, Caroline reminded me I need to put the feedback form up. So yeah, please do answer our poll. And yeah, we always like to get a sense of the feedback so that we can improve. Thank you very much.